Welcome to Kitchen Sink Dharma. Now, we talk a lot about mindfulness, and mindfulness is a really important skill that we cultivate in meditation. But mindfulness isn't the only factor that's required for waking up and freeing ourselves. In Buddhist teachings, there's actually a list of 7 factors of awakening, because we do like our lists. And mindfulness is the first factor on that list, and today I want to talk a bit about the second one. The second factor of awakening is usually translated as investigation. The phrase in Pali, which is the language that the teachings were first recorded in, is Dhammavicaya. And you could call it exploring our moment-to-moment experience. So the mental and physical phenomena that constantly arise in our meditation, not just noticing them, but exploring them. And this is about developing our understanding of the way that things are, and exactly what is it we're looking for. That brings us to another list, a shorter list this time. Some of you might be familiar with this. The list is called the 3 characteristics, or the 3 marks of existence. And this is really a core teaching. And the 3 characteristics are: number 1, impermanence; number 2, unsatisfactoriness or suffering; and number 3, not self. And I will explain them. So the 3 characteristics apply to everything, absolutely everything that we experience. Everything is impermanent. Everything arises and passes. Nothing can offer us any lasting satisfaction. And there's no fixed, permanent thing called the self. It's just a number of processes constantly shifting and changing. And I will go on to talk a little bit more about each of these characteristics, but first I want to make a general point. So understanding all of this on an intellectual level doesn't really help us. It doesn't wake us up. It doesn't free us. What really helps us is if we can examine our experience in the moment and just see it for what it is. So I've never looked to insight meditation for the answers to the big metaphysical questions. I don't know about the meaning of life or what happens after we die. I'm much more interested in learning to relate to my experience and developing resilience, developing balance and unshakability. And that's something that we do by simply paying attention precisely, carefully, consistently, just noticing thoughts and sensations and feelings as they arise, and observing them arise and observing them disappear, and doing this with some balance and equanimity, and investigating them, investigating what they are. And this is really transformative, and it all happens on a moment-to-moment level. So it's not something big and extravagant. There's often very little drama in the insights. It's more of a gradual opening to understanding, a gradual training. So never mind any sort of great beliefs or sudden awakening or anything else like that. The question is here, what can you immediately know? So the Buddha wasn't interested in telling his followers what the cosmos is like. Instead, he offered a very radically different relationship just to the world of moment-to-moment experience. So Dhammavicaya here doesn't describe intellectual investigation. It's always about an embodied understanding. It's about a shift from conceptual knowing just to knowing something experientially. And for that, mindfulness isn't enough. We need this added quality of investigation. And an embodied investigation helps us unpack our assumptions, our views and our narratives. And it really brings our lives into some kind of alignment with the 3 characteristics. It really allows those to be the whole lens through which we see the world. And today I really want to talk about my own experience of insight and what I've found really helpful in seeing the world in this way, through the whole lens of the 3 characteristics. So the first characteristic is impermanence, or the word is anicca. And to me, the value of just declaring that everything is impermanent, that's fairly limited really. We know everything's impermanent. Sure, one day I'm going to die, and my shiny new car is going to be a rusty wreck one day. We shouldn't get attached to it and all that kind of thing. That's okay, that's possibly helpful, but that's not the thing that's really made the biggest difference for me. What I think is helpful is actually realizing that our experience is constantly changing, every minute, every second. So this is really impermanence on a moment-to-moment level. Just the understanding that there's nothing really to hold on to, but also there's nothing really to be afraid of. And the final words of the Buddha in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta refer to this. He talks about this. He basically says, life is impermanent now, just get on with it. And this is our big challenge for us. This is what we need courage for. Life is unstable. Life is ever changing. We look for solidity, we look for certainty and safety. But meanwhile, everything keeps changing. And the discomfort that arises from this state of affairs is something we can use quite creatively. We can even allow ourselves to go a bit beyond the boundaries of what's familiar and stretch our edges a bit, just learning to let it flow through us. And our learning often happens when we're a bit uncomfortable. It often happens in a crisis, for example, and the whole process of growth might not always be comfortable. And I think sometimes for me the most important insights have actually become embedded during very difficult times. So for example, the times when I've realized the extent to which I feel the need to be in control, the times when I've understood that I don't have to be in control. And these are the lessons of impermanence. And they can only really be learned through experience. And through meditation, you learn how your attention, when it's not needed, tends to look around, how we scan for danger. And if there's no danger around, we scan for entertainment. And all of this comes from learning just to study our attention, investigate what it is, just asking, what is this? And I used to think the only time meditation practice would be actually valuable is if we managed to get the mind still, if we managed to have a very serene meditation. And that's not actually true. Because when we're not settled, and we notice our minds are just constantly changing and not completely under our control, that actually gives us the opportunity to practice allowing ourselves to be with that change, allowing ourselves just to embrace the whole impermanence of everything in our experience. Because the alternative to that is desperately trying to hold the mind steady and fighting our mind states as they keep just arising and changing from one to the next. It's where we get a headache from. It's a pointless task. So the next characteristic is usually referred to as dukkha. And dukkha is a spectrum word. It describes all range from basic unsatisfactoriness to suffering. It's often translated as suffering. I find it can be helpful actually to keep the word dukkha rather than trying to translate it. And the second characteristic is often expressed as all life is suffering. I don't think that's actually accurate. Or at least I think it's misleading. So my experience is not of constant suffering, it's not constant anguish. I think the second characteristic is much more subtle than that. It might be more helpful to say that the world doesn't deliver. So dukkha can sometimes take the form of a slight sense of unease. It might be just a vague sense of lack, it might be just a nagging thought. It's just an underlying feeling. And in this case, an unpleasant one that usually arises subconsciously or preconsciously. So dukkha is not the things that happen to us. It's the way that we react to our experience. It's about what happens in the mind. So for example, when we don't get what we want, or if we do get what we want but it doesn't quite deliver, or even if it does deliver, maybe there's not enough of it, or we're worried that we're going to lose it, or we get bored with it. All of that is dukkha. Because the world can never really totally satisfy us, not in a lasting way. It might appear to satisfy us, but then the next moment just lapses into unsatisfactoriness again. And dukkha is very much linked to the first characteristic of impermanence. And again, for me, the real value lies in just seeing this from one moment to the next. I think that's much more useful than making any pronouncements about how all of life is suffering or whatever. So the third characteristic is often seen as the most difficult one. And the word is anatta, and it refers to the absence of a fixed self. And again, forget about philosophical arguments. If we can train ourselves just to investigate the three characteristics in our experience, observing how our lived experience in each moment occurs, just watching it with some precision, but also some curiosity, some friendly curiosity, we start to see how we're continually constructing a sense of self, and how this construct of self-view is a real direct consequence of our uncertainty, of not having anything to hold on to. It's part of the process of the ego seeking safety and security. So Buddhist teaching doesn't deny the idea of self as a process, but it does deny that the self is something fixed. So when the Buddha speaks about the self, he doesn't dismiss it, he doesn't leave a vacuum, he just shows it to be something quite fluid. And that's actually really good news. If our sense of self is a process, then change is possible, awakening is possible. If it was really fixed, we would be stuck. where we are. And to get an embodied understanding of anatta takes time. It takes quite a lot of practice before it sinks in. And only really by investigating the whole instability of existence and hanging in there can we really start to live it. So we investigate moments when we create a rigid sense of self and moments when the sense of self is perhaps a bit less prominent, a bit more fluid. And we start to see that our feelings of contractedness, our feelings of separateness come and go. It means being patient. It means bringing some precision to the task until we really get to know the territory, until we really get to see how our sensations and our mental patterns arise and change and disappear all day, every day. It's part of what we're doing when we meditate. So this experiential investigation really means bringing our lives into alignment with what we know. Because part of us knows that constantly reacting and clinging makes us miserable. And the kind of knowledge that we get from meditation, the embodied knowledge, really enables us to change the way that we live. And it's really important that we don't assume a very superficial view of all this, like, everything's impermanent, so nothing matters. Or life is suffering, so we just have to put up with it. It's very easy to handle this in a glib way. But fully understanding it is freedom. So any sense of not being fully free means not fully understanding the three characteristics. And the task of insight meditation is to explore all of this deeply, often subtly, but all in the service of reducing distress. It's all about loosening our grip a little bit and just easing our identification with the ego, particularly within the whole realm of the personal narrative. It's very common for us to be constantly comparing and judging and resenting and resisting and worrying about how people see us. And this view of self is constantly formed and reformed over and over. We might not like our personal narrative, but we still do everything that we can to protect it. We try and cement our world so that we know where we are, we know what's coming next. But it's not a strategy that works. It's not really a strategy that makes us happy. It's an expression of confusion. And when I use the word confusion here, this isn't a moralistic statement. It's not anybody's fault that we're confused. But that confusion makes us vulnerable. Makes us vulnerable to fear and anxiety and rage. Because to be that preoccupied with our sense of self means just never feeling like we're good enough. So it tends to revolve around a sense of lack. So the self that we're trying to find is not findable. And the more we attach to an idea about who we should be, the more we suffer. And this suffering spreads out into the rest of the world. Any failure to be who we want to be is seen as a personal failure. We think, I wasn't a good enough self in that situation. And so we try and protect our most sensitive areas, or shut down, or try and make ourselves invisible, or go to great lengths to avoid difficult feelings. And all of those habits of denial and dissociation and contraction and so on, they're not necessary. They're optional. And there is another way. And every time we explore our experience with equanimity and investigate what's really going on, we untangle the knot a little bit. We start to open up to the preciousness of life and the richness and the beauty of it and the whole splendor of our embodied experience. It's about accepting our humanity. So thanks as always for listening.